Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nerdstalgia Live. I am your host, Tim Babb, alongside with my handsome trio of co-hosts, Donnelly, Kyle, and Richard. How's everybody doing tonight?
Doing great. Fantastic. Yeah, it's been a great week. History of the World Part 2 came out this week. I just wanted to put that out there first and foremost. Last week, History of the World Part 2. 40 years.
That's insane that it's been that long.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll tell you, it was decent. I enjoyed it. I don't know if anyone else has watched it. It's 8 half-hour episodes. Yeah, 8 half-hour episodes.
Where's that on? I'll have to check that
It's
out.
on Hulu.
Okay. Oh, check it out right after this.
Yeah, you won't. Well, I want to thank everybody. We are now live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook Live. Appreciate you all. I already see a lot of people filtering into chat here. Thank you all for joining us, where you can find us every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Nerds on all the socials. And if you want to really help us, click all the buttons. Like, subscribe, follow, everything with a check mark on it. Just eviscerate it, as Dan Woods would say.
Smash it, if you will.
I don't like to use the term smash.
I know you don't.
I like those thumbs up buttons. They make me happy.
I agree. I do too. I want to say what's up to the chat real quick. Techie Spec, he is doing the new raid in Destiny's Lightfall, so he's going to be watching in the background, but I'm assuming he's not going to be super interactive in chat. But thanks for joining us, Chris. Tara, what's up? Bagel Cookies, let's go. Sega.
That's right. That's right.
I'm talking about.
No, we're off to a rough start already. Kyle is back. Yes, he is. Dysentery and all. He's dysentery free.
No Scarlet Tina.
How were the adventures out to Oregon?
Yeah, I was going to say he just completed the Oregon Trail.
Karen B won't talk. Thanks for joining. And we've got Dan in the house, Tyler in the house, Caitlin in the house. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It's going to be a fun show.
Another Sega fan.
Hey.
It's
didn't want to
be a
call
long
attention
episode.
to that. Yeah, I didn't want to call attention to that. Sherry in the house, and so on and so on. We have a very, very exciting show tonight. Tonight, we are bringing you the early 90s console wars. Super Nintendo, or as my high school football coach used to call it, Super No Friendo, versus the Sega Genesis. And may the best man win. Tonight, I will be teaming up with Rich. I feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch. And Donnelly will be teaming up with Kyle. Kyle and Donnelly are on Team Sega. And Rich and I are on Team Super Nintendo, the only choice, the right choice. This is the way. And we're not going to waste much time here. We're going to get right into it. But before we do, any thoughts you want to get out of the way before we get into this? Because I feel like this might come to blows here.
Well, Tim, you and I talked very briefly when you mentioned the topic for the episode, and I said I actually had a little bit of a difficult time. My knee-jerk reaction is, of course, the SNES. However, as I've become an adult collector, I have certainly learned to appreciate and love the Genesis quite a bit more than I did when I was a wee lad. That
those
being
clamshells,
said,
baby.
That being said, I am still firmly Team SNES. It is, at the end of the day, probably the console that I have spent the most time on. It's still the console that I default to when I'm playing retro games.
Okay, I mean, you're doing a little. You're kind of middling a little bit there with that statement. I don't love that.
He's coming over to our side.
I'm feeling a little more confident over here.
No,
yeah.
Don't worry. I'm gonna double down. I'm gonna double down on the SNES. I'm gonna start slinging some mud towards Sega. Don't you worry.
We have a lot of Sega love in chat.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
got a lot
That's because there's a lot of Sega love to be had. That's why.
And here's the deal. Like, I'm not going to sit here and completely hate on Sega, but I will say that it is put on a pedestal that is just totally unnecessary. I mean, I look at Sega Genesis as the way I look at this whole thing really is, again, wrestling fan from the 90s. Okay. This is like the Monday Night Wars. You've got Super Nintendo, aka the WWE, and then you've got WCW, aka the Sega Genesis.
See, I like where you're going with this, but I will say if you wanted to play a wrestling game back in those days, you definitely played it on a Sega. Just putting it out there.
No.
Oh,
and we're gonna
if you wanted to play a good one anyway,
you
played it on Sega.
Oh, Royal Rumble? No, the Royal Rumble game on SNES, far better. But we're gonna get into all that. But really, we got I love this name. I just had to call this out. Sega changed the gaming landscape in countless ways. They did. I will say that. So what, in my opinion, just kind of looking at this in a real high level, right? Sega came out first, obviously. So Sega was out in what, 1989? Correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle. 1989, Sega Genesis launched. They had a little bit of a head start on Super Nintendo as far as what they were releasing. And correct me if I'm wrong, when Super Nintendo came out, Sega was ready with kind of their version of Sonic, their version of Mario with Sonic the Hedgehog, and that game released
91
when Super Nintendo came out. So when you look at this kind of on the grand level, the way I looked at it is Nintendo had already been a big name in the gaming world. I mean, Nintendo was it, right? You've got this company like Sega coming along. They had to do something to be different, reminiscent of the New World Order back in WCW. What Sega did was they came out and they started to tailor they tried to capture that more adult audience. So they came out with more blood, more violence, more fighting, and that sort of thing. And I think they did a great job at kind of taking some of that older audience and bringing them into their consoles, and which I think they did a spectacular job on, whereas Nintendo had always been kind of catering towards kids. So I do think that they were different in that sense, and I respect their angle. But at the end of the day, we know who won. I mean, we know who's still talked about to this day. Sega ain't around no more.
But they're still talked about.
The thing is, Nintendo's games were so good that they didn't need to skew older. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Mortal Kombat later. But obviously, you wanted to play Mortal Kombat on the Genesis because of the blood, the no censoring that Nintendo did. But at the end of the day, that's just a gimmick. The quality of the majority of the games that came out for the SNES really spoke for themselves, and they didn't need any additional gimmicks other than just a quality game.
I mean, I hear what you're saying there, and I will say that, from the get-go, the Sega launch title was definitely designed for a teenage and older demographic from the start. Like, they knew, hands down, Sega of America had no intention of attacking anybody under the age of 10. There was no place for them. They knew that Nintendo had the lockdown on it, and they capitalized on the untapped market because there weren't teenagers playing Nintendo. There weren't teenagers playing, or even adults, college kids. They weren't playing video games unless they were going to an arcade. And Sega gave them that opportunity to have that close to arcade level graphics at their home with titles they already knew. But like Altered Beast, launch title right there, definitely targeted for that older, mature demographic, and they hit the nail from then on out forever.
So we're getting into some good discussion already. What I want to do is I want to start this off, and I'm going to do this by teams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give right now Donnelly and Kyle, I'm going to give you guys the spotlight. I want you to sell me and sell Team Super Nintendo and everybody watching on why Sega is the better console. You got about a minute. Go ahead.
I mean, the first thing I want to bring up, and I've been talking to Kyle about this nonstop, is blast processing. The marketing, the blast processing.
The blast processor, baby.
Blast processing. Sega has it. Nintendo don't. And since I say that, let's go into the marketing. Marketing was crushing it. I mean, they put up billboards all around Walmart headquarters, nonstop, surrounded that place with Sega stores, billboards, the mall tours, all of that to get some, stake in the shelving out there to be able to promote their product. And once it was there, it sold. And it sold fast, just as fast as Sonic ran across the Sega screen. Nothing out there was moving as fast as Sega. And when they launched Super Mario Brothers and pitted it side by side, you know what everybody said? Why is Mario so slow?
Hmm.
On top of that, you want to talk about the ports. We could talk about ports. I know Mortal Kombat was already mentioned, but there's a lot of ports out there.
You're talking arcade ports?
No, I'm even talking like Aladdin. He got a sword on the Sega. What, I could bounce on their heads on Nintendo? Come on, how much more fluid was the style? Much better game to play because of that sword. You had 2 weapons instead of 1. New way to attack. Just all in all. That's my...
Well, let's just start with this. We're just going to talk about the design. Black is sexy, baby. It's sleeker. Your Super Nintendo would turn piss yellow over time. Right? Also, obviously, the cases, so much better, the clamshell. You get your deteriorating Super Nintendo case there. You got to put that in acrylic if you're collecting now.
Cite your sources.
Honestly, the 6-button controller when Sega came out was actually also a better controller than the Super Nintendo controller as well. So you're talking design, you're talking, what's sexier, sleeker, Sega Genesis. Also, the early sports game domination. You weren't playing Madden on Super Nintendo until '93. They had the early Madden games. They had Joe Montana. They had amazing.
Did they have Joe Montana or was it Montana?
Remember, this is for a mature audience. It's Montana.
Also, I mean,
you look at those notes. Keep looking.
I got the receipts, dog. Sega Channel. I had it all 95. It was on Neil's time.
Is it time for our rebuttal yet?
That was ahead of a time. Modern gaming. It was the first games you could actually technically stream through. So there you go. Didn't see a Super Nintendo.
Ding. Well, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that I love.
You want to shred him first?
I'm gonna start, and then you can go, Rich. So there's a couple of things. All I'm hearing a lot here. Yanks Fan O'Hare, really appreciate you. Thanks for joining. He's not wrong. So a couple of things here. All I'm hearing, I heard exactly what I expected to hear. Okay. Expected to hear. I knew the first thing out of Donnelly's mouth was going to be blast. Okay. I knew that was coming. I'm hearing a lot of things. Black, sleek console, clamshells. I'm hearing fast, Nintendo. Okay. I'm hearing lots of bells and whistles and excess. Okay. What I'm not hearing is meat and potatoes.
Okay.
Of the console itself.
Okay.
Now I'm still rebutting. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is another reason why I draw the NWO and WCW line. Okay. And I'm going to keep referring to it that way because in my opinion, Sega Genesis was the NWO/WCW to the WWE. WWE clearly the more profitable brand, the more watched brand, the higher rated brand. So Sega had to come out and punish Super Nintendo with defamating ads saying Nintendo because their product was not superior enough to stand on its own. Therefore, they have to bash. Hold on. Therefore, they have to bash their competition, which in a career in sales, that's rule number 1. You never talk bad about your competition. And you say they had great marketing. It will work for a short time to pull viewers over. And then guess what?
Welcome to the next level.
It gets played out. And that's exactly what it did. And you want to talk gimmicks. You mentioned it. It's your brand you're promoting with Sega. You mentioned gimmicks. No bigger gimmick than blast. Okay. Because when you look at the specifications of it, and Donnelly, I know you are a spec guy. You already know this. And you're preying on dumbasses like myself who don't know much about specs, okay, and the tech behind this. You would know that actually had little to no impact whatsoever on the games themselves.
It was vaporware. It was completely made up, and I'll give you that. But the fact that they sold it to everybody and there were 10-year-olds walking down the street being like, Sega's got blast processing. Yes, I need that in my life. That's where I give them the credit.
I'm going to give Rich the stage here, and then we're going to toss it back to you guys, okay?
All right. I'm glad you shredded them on marketing because, I mean, I don't think you can fault Sega for fantastic marketing, but like you said, there needed to be something to back it up. And clearly, while they did have some highs, Nintendo definitely had the support of not only their first party studios but their third party studios. Yep. I do want to circle back to one thing Kyle said about the controller. The Genesis controller was just a giant black potato. Yeah, I mean, that thing was
6-button.
Awful. No, you pick up a Super Nintendo controller, and that's essentially every modern controller that you pick up. You pick up an Xbox controller, you pick up a PlayStation controller. That was the prototype of every single modern controller that we have. It was so perfect that the design really has not changed that much since the early 90s.
You don't see 3 or 6 buttons on our modern controllers today.
The introduction of the shoulder buttons, the 4-button layout opposite the D-pad, that was the prototype, and that model has only been improved upon since then. Just in terms of games and franchises, longevity. I mean, Nintendo has Metroid, Zelda, Mario, Donkey Kong, F-Zero. They have all these classic, very Nintendo franchises. It's their company identity, and most of those franchises are still going strong to this day. Metroid Prime Remake was just released. I mean, these are franchises that are 30, in some cases 40 years old, that will stand the test of time. With very few exceptions, Sega does not have that. I mean, sure, there's Sonic, there may be a couple others, but certainly in terms of nostalgia factor and people wanting to revisit these characters, revisit these worlds and stories, Nintendo, they were the architects of building these franchises.
Agreed. Well said, Rich. Donnelly.
Just to chime in a little bit, are we talking about Sega Genesis versus SNES? Or are we talking about Sega Genesis versus Nintendo as a whole? Because clearly that's an unfair fight in that regard. For any of those franchises, maybe I'll give you like Donkey Kong Country to come across as an SNES original title, but every other piece was just a pickup of an existing franchise already.
Hold on,
and I'll give you.
Don't give him that. There. Don't give him that. Hold on.
Here's the thing.
No. Hold on.
Really
don't let him skate away with that.
Well, hang on, because I got more. Because if you want to talk about third-party support, Sega had way better third-party support.
Oh, they had
especially when it came to things like EA.
Yeah.
Was all over Sega and did nothing for Nintendo
because they needed it. And
EA needed Sega. Because there wasn't all the licensing restrictions, there wasn't the control over the carts, there wasn't all of that proprietary tech that Nintendo required astronomical programming fees and development fees for.
But
Nintendo was monopolistic with that.
Take companies like Konami and Capcom. Of course, they were hedging their bets. They were, of course, releasing games on both systems. But the bulk of what they were releasing, their best games, their AAA games, were all on the Super Nintendo.
Yep. I want to respond very quickly to what Donnelly said a second ago, and then we can move on. And I'm going to kick it back over to Team Sega. But you mentioned, if we're talking in the grand scheme of things, Nintendo versus Sega, clearly there's a reason why. Is all I'll say. There's a reason why Nintendo's still around and Sega is not. Okay? Because there's a clear-cut winner here. So I'm going to just take that shot where I can. And you also mentioned that you're talking about Nintendo as a whole. We are not. You want to talk about original titles. You want to talk about Mario. The greatest Mario game ever created was Super Mario 3. Period. And anyone that says is just flat out wrong. That is the only answer. And that's all I needed to chime in. I'm going to kick it back over to you guys.
So just super quick soundbite. You can't talk about these two companies, this particular battle, without talking about legacy.
So, and I'll put into there that if you want to talk about Sega's downfall, it was because of SOJ. SOJ was why SOA failed. And for those unfamiliar, SOJ is Sega of Japan, SOA is Sega of America. They were effectively run as two separate companies. And once Sega of Japan no longer let Tom Kalinske have any control, that's when the downfall of Sega occurred. That's when they pushed upon us with the Saturn and stuff like that. That just was not ready for America. But, you know, when it comes to the Sega games, I'm going back to the ports again. Every port that you find was a better game played on Sega than it was on Super Nintendo. There were frame drops. The Super Nintendo couldn't handle as many sprites on screen. You want to talk about blast processing being made up? That may be, but the processing chip within a Genesis, much more powerful than what was in an SNES, capable of handling up to 32 simultaneous sprites on screen. You want to talk about specs, Tim? The SNES couldn't handle anywhere near that. We're talking 17 frames per second.
Need it, though.
If you're porting a game, you're playing something like Jurassic Park, for example. Jurassic Park had a top-down, awkward, going up the screen experience, felt like a Nintendo game on the SNES, but then you played it on a Genesis. You had that side scroller next to impossible platforming.
Go ahead, Genesis was relying on ports because most of these developers found it easier and cheaper to just create arcade ports where they were dedicating their main resources to building original titles for the Super Nintendo. So, you know, the Genesis was absolutely a port machine, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you wanted to play, you know, your top tier original titles, you were absolutely going to get more of them on the Super Nintendo. And I think, as Tyler said, you know, the best versions of those franchises, Super Mario Brothers 3 being the exception, all were on the Super Nintendo. It was those games on that system that cemented franchises like Zelda and Metroid. You know, those games on that system are the reason we're still talking about those franchises. We're still getting excited for the new Zelda game that's releasing in May.
Yep.
It's because of the Super Nintendo.
You brought up specs, Donnelly, and that, you know, do I want to talk specs? I do. And there's a reason for it. So you mentioned gameplay being so much better and sharper on Sega. The fact is, every game looked better on Super Nintendo, period. Because the games, the actual, I don't know the technical terminology behind it, but all I know is that, and I know you'll eat me alive on this side of things, but like the fact is there was something to do with the whatever processor Super Nintendo had, they had a better pixel count. Am I on the right track there than Sega did, where the games actually looked better than Sega, where Sega, their processor had like a smoother gameplay.
Processor was faster, 7.6 megahertz compared to 3.6 megahertz on the Super Nintendo. That's the stat they won with speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned things that killed Sega. I would argue that there was one thing that killed Sega, and that was Donkey Kong. Because Donkey Kong, in my opinion, Donkey Kong Country was the Sega killer. Sega was beating Super Nintendo pretty handedly for a while, okay? About almost 18
1993 months. For sure.
Yes, they were handing it to Super Nintendo, okay? And what did Super Nintendo do? They created a brand new IP, something you said they weren't capable of, with Donkey Kong, and it literally put the dagger in Sega.
I already gave them credit for creating Donkey Kong with the Super Nintendo.
I'm just saying.
That game was
when do we get to talk about Sega shooting themselves in the foot?
Yeah. The May 1995 Expo.
Putting the nails in their own coffin with the Sega CD and the 32X.
Yeah. I mean, it was all Sega Japan again, and that's where it came down on them. You know, if Tom Kalinske had given full right to continue to run the show, I think that it's fine. I'll drop his name twice now. And I think that he's a very important guy, and he made a lot of great business decisions and a lot of the toys that we still talk about today, including these game consoles. You know, if it weren't for him, Sonic wouldn't look the way that it was. You know, if it weren't for him, the marketing wouldn't have happened the way that it did. If it weren't for him, Genesis never would have taken off. It just never would have.
I agree.
Just to comment on the comment section, Golden Axe and someone mentioned Streets of Rage.
Yes, both
fantastic games, fantastic franchises.
They're both fantastic.
But again, not enough to elevate the system above the Super Nintendo in my eyes.
Give me Double Dragon all day over those.
Yeah,
just saying.
But I'll tell you, any beat 'em up played better on Sega. It just had better frame rates. It had better frame rates. It had more accurate response times. It definitely
Earthworm
did.
Jim was better on Sega.
Earthworm Jim
was
more,
better on
and
Sega.
they had more levels. What about like Toe Jam and Earl?
Toe Jam and Earl was spectacular. You guys haven't even mentioned my favorite game, which was better on Sega.
Comic Zone.
No,
well, yeah. I mean that wasn't on. That wasn't on SNES, but
Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Yep. With the blood, and that's where it goes back to. With the blood, they were allowed to have the violence. They were allowed to have the gore. Nintendo was not doing that
because they needed that in order to compete with Super Nintendo.
I mean, it's Nintendo's fault that we even have an ESRB.
Well, shall we go down the Night Trap rabbit hole and how?
Night Trap, baby.
Yeah, well, I mean, that created a whole Senate subcommittee dedicated to scrutinizing video games. So
it did, but Mortal Kombat was the
ESRB is tame by comparison.
But the Mortal Kombat started all of that. Nintendo taking Sega to court, saying that they were influencing the minds of children. There was a whole big thing going on with it. Plus, did you know that a 10-year-old once sued Nintendo back in the heyday?
No.
Yeah.
Not.
If 10-year-olds are suing them, you know what I mean? Then they can't be good. I don't remember what the rest of the article was.
What was the lawsuit?
Anyone can sue anyone.
I'm gonna get your details here. Yeah. I'll get your details. Come back to me on that one.
We will. Kyle, you've been a little quiet. I know we're stomping the living shit out of Team Sega, but I want you to speak up.
All right, I've been trying. So, dude, I mean, let's just say it right here. Michael Jackson Moonwalker. All right,
support.
And let's just say it right here. How many times have I mentioned WCW and NWO? What did WCW do? They brought in all the celebrities. They brought in all the NBA players. They brought in everybody because they had to compete with the better brand. So thanks for just pushing my point even more.
Listen, one of my favorite games of all time, Phantasy Star 4, is a Genesis game. It's still not enough to elevate the system above what are two of my absolute favorite games of all time on the Super Nintendo, which are Final Fantasy VI, at the time it was called Final Fantasy III, and The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Yes.
Okay.
Cricket.
What's going
on?
The lawsuit against Nintendo was from a 9-year-old boy, based off of a baseball title that was released on the NES. It was by LJN Toys. You guys might know about LJN if you know about Nintendo.
All about LJN.
So they released a baseball game, and it was officially licensed by Nintendo and promised to have true-to-life rosters, whereas the rosters were just represented by numbers, and there were no names. And there were a few other things that were true to life that were not in any way true to life. So this 10-year-old sued Nintendo about it, and they settled on that one.
Well, okay.
In my opinion, Sega Genesis was kicking Super Nintendo's
clearly
ass.
The 9-year-old doesn't understand how the Players Association works versus the league, and that just because the league has signed off on it doesn't mean the Players Association has signed off on it, or vice versa. So,
and that
9-year-old can eat it.
I'm just saying, it happened.
9-year-old can eat it, and also something that really hasn't even. I know Team Sega has been shying away from this because they've only got a few titles to hang their hats on. Like you can hang your hat on fucking Toe Jam and Earl and Earthworm Jim, Sonic.
Good games.
Okay?
Good games.
Like, yeah,
they're all great games.
They're fine. Yeah.
Road Rash.
We had
Road Rash is another one.
We
I'm
had
a huge fan of Road Rash.
We had Blood
of Dolphin.
Combat. Okay, but
you
the
had
fact
Green Blood.
is, when it comes to game library,
not sports games,
it's not even close. It's not even close. Nope. There's no competition. The game library for the Super Nintendo is, to this day, in my opinion, and you guys can chime in here, I think might be the greatest game library in any console that we've ever gotten.
I don't know about that.
I
wouldn't give it to the Genesis, but I don't think that the SNES has the greatest
only
library.
console that I think is a possible contender would be the PS2.
See, that's the only one I think that would contend with it. But it's also a little bit of a different era too. You know what I mean? Like games took on a kind of a different life at that point. So
I would argue that Sega did more damage to Sega than Nintendo did damage to Sega because they were kicking their ass. But then they just wanted to modify. They wanted to,
right?
I agree.
Again, it was SOJ. It was the SOJ influence on it.
Dropping that Sega Saturn 4 months early, pissing off retailers.
So, here's the other thing. So Sega had fantastic marketing. I don't think anybody's denying that. Sega's marketing sold systems. What they didn't do is sell games.
Interesting.
The Genesis has fantastic games. I mean,
it does. It's got a lot of great.
I've already mentioned one of my favorites, Phantasy Star 4.
Echo the Dolphin, fantastic
Vector
franchise
Man,
on there.
Echo,
the Mutant League games, football hockey.
Yes, the X-Men games were great on Genesis.
X-Men 93
Castlevania Bloodlines, another one of my favorite games from one of my
That's
favorite
one of my all-time favorites.
Yep, the Batman
Contra
titles
Hard
were
Corps.
good.
So the Genesis had all these fantastic games, but they're essentially forgotten about unless you're a diehard collector or a diehard fan of those individual franchises, because Sega put all their focus on selling this sexy blast processing system,
which
they forgot about the games. Yeah,
I mean it was, but you're right. They didn't have the marketing behind the games, and maybe that's where they dropped the ball. I really don't think that necessarily had to do with that, because they were selling like hotcakes. They were outselling. Donkey Kong, as Tim thinks, was the one that changed it. But I'm still hung up that Sega of Japan ruined Sega of America, turned them from a console company into a straight up software company that just licenses out Sonic every once in a while to Nintendo usually.
I would argue, and it's funny because you're kind of making two
sides of the same coin.
You're making my argument here by saying Sega killed Sega.
And I said that earlier. I agree.
They tried to attack. Their whole marketing campaign was to just put down Nintendo.
And I don't think that that's what it was. I don't think that that's what did Sega end.
That's what I'm saying, that they got off on the wrong foot by starting it that way. Okay. That was their whole ploy.
Well, it's not sustainable.
This is everything we have that Super Nintendo does not. And that was their whole
They didn't have a choice.
Model.
They didn't have a choice. If you think about the TurboGrafx and the other systems that were available at the time, they made no headway because they didn't go after Nintendo. It was only because they went after Nintendo that they actually got their name exposed out there. If it wasn't for those guerrilla kind of tactics, going head to head on the main stage, literally screaming matches at conventions between Nintendo and Sega, that they wouldn't have even made it to where they were. Well, they would have just gone down just like all the others.
You can't compare the other systems like the TurboGrafx 16 and what was another contemporary, the 3DO. I mean, they were niche at best. Much smaller companies. That's not a fair comparison.
I mean, when Sega of America started, it had 16 people working there.
Right. Again, Sega of America it's a subsidiary of Sega Japan, which is a huge conglomerate and was a huge conglomerate at that time.
But they were comparable in size to things like the TurboGrafx company and stuff like that when they got started. They were absolutely comparable in size. And it wasn't until Japan started funding them more and reached out to Tom Kalinske directly. Okay.
I'm going to disagree with you on that point. Hudson Soft, which is the developer behind the TurboGrafx 16, was a significantly smaller, and up to that point, mostly a software company, trying to dip their toes into the console wars, which, the previous generation had been dominated by Nintendo and Sega as well. So, a little bit of a different scenario there, in my opinion.
Okay.
And Mushroom Man had a good point here with, are we talking about marketing or which system was the best of all time? And look, I'm going to talk, I'm just going to go right for this here. It's low hanging fruit. This is the piece I cannot wrap my head around. I know Donnelly and Kyle, you guys are Team Sega. I get it, okay? But I can't possibly imagine if a gun to your head, okay? Gun to your head. We're going desert island, and you are stranded on an island with a Sony Trinitron 30-inch CRT TV and one console with the full suite of games attached to that console. How can you possibly look me in the eye with pure and true honesty and tell me that you would choose a Sega Genesis as your only console over the Super NES? Never play a Mario game or Mario Kart ever again for the rest of your life.
Donnelly, no Metroid.
I know.
No Metroid.
I know. It's like a Super Metroid, but never have to deal with that new bridge again, right? But I tell you, because I am a loyal Zelda and Metroid fan, those trump everything else.
Well, then you lose.
But it doesn't mean
it
doesn't mean that I prefer going to my buddy's house to play their Sega. The cool kids, and back in the middle school had the Sega. Haven't you ever seen Gilligan's Island?
On that island with us.
Listen, Gilligan's Island, a few coconuts, and then some water streams will have electricity up and running.
We had Nintendo forever. When I first saw Sonic, man, at my friend's 8th birthday party, holy shit.
Yeah, holy shit was right.
Sonic go across
and I felt the same way. And then after a few minutes, you're like,
dude.
okay, cool. This guy goes upside down in little circles. All right, let me get back to Mario, where shit gets more real.
Where shit gets more real. Little mushrooms walking around, talking to you, dinosaurs stealing your princess. Yeah, that's more real.
Let me go save Princess Toadstool. I don't need to be spinning around eating coins and shitting them out my ass.
But just kidding. All you did was rescue a mushroom man because she's in another castle. Yeah, no tricks or anything going on there.
Wrong system. But I appreciate the reference.
All right.
You want to talk villains too? You want to talk Sonic versus Mario? I mean,
come on, Dr. Robotnik.
Dr. Robotnik over
Eggman?
Bowser?
Eggman?
Get the fuck out of here.
Come on, he's got a whole horde of robot critters coming to get you.
Can we just talk about Nintendo for a second?
Yeah, please.
You've been talking about it all night. Go ahead.
Can we talk about just specifically Nintendo and how awesome this new Mario movie is going to be? Like, I think
it looks good. It looks good.
I don't care if you're Team Sega or Team Nintendo.
So,
we're all.
Am I the only one who was surprised that it seems to be that Luigi is the one who's been taken captive here?
That's what it seems like. That's what it seems like.
I was a little surprised.
The princess was complicit in most of those shenanigans. Have we not talked enough about Nintendo? Not nearly enough.
Oh, no.
So what I want to do, we're about 40 minutes in here. So this is what I want to do. I want to go round table. Okay. I want to give everybody 1 minute to share their closing argument where you've got to just give it every last dagger you've got in your arsenal to prove your point. Okay. Everything you got. And then we're going to move on to our rankings. How do you guys feel about that?
All right, Tim, you start.
You want me to start?
I want you to start. Go to Rich.
Go ahead.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So at the end of the day, there's one system that is still around today. Okay. We just talked about this earlier today, Donnelly. We both literally said, and correct me if I'm wrong on our conversation, but paraphrasing, man, Nintendo doesn't make a great system. But people just eat this Nintendo Switch up. And what did I say to you? This isn't a conference call, Rich. Why do you keep going off camera? Picking your nose. We literally said because Mario and the Nintendo properties are so strong that they sell consoles because of what they've created over years of character development and game development and nostalgia. The fact is, there's only one standing today, okay? You can say what you want about Blast. You can say what you want about the sexiness of the console. It's black. It's sleek. You can say what you want about Sega Channel, Sega CD, all the add-ons. We haven't even mentioned. And Rich, I'm going to need you for this one. I can't remember the name of it. But what was the piece that allowed you to play Game Boy on your console? Because that was fantastic.
The Game Boy player.
Game Boy?
Yeah. The Game Boy player.
Yeah. Yep. Fantastic. Super smart move by Nintendo, by Super Nintendo in particular. And there's multiple reasons why Sega failed and never stood a chance. There were a lot of great things that Sega did. A lot of great IPs and different games. Mortal Kombat 2, one of the greatest games. I'm not arguing that. I love Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm not saying that I don't. But what I'm saying is you can't hold a candle to Super Nintendo with the game library, with the innovation, and what Sega excelled in their initial marketing campaign, just completely slamming Super Nintendo. They lacked in creating and evolving with the times and continuing to put out new properties that people wanted to come over to and play. That's where they failed. Go ahead. We'll go to Donnelly for you on Team Sega.
So, I hear everything that you just say there, and I will just stick to what has been known and what every Sega fan knows. They're faster, they have better frame rates, they get a smoother animation, more powerful blast processing.
You love to throw that out there.
I just love the fact that became a thing, But
it was a good trick.
All of the multi-platform games that were available played better on Sega. They all had a reputation of, maybe not having as good a resolution as the Super Nintendo offered, but better motion, better frame rates, better responsiveness. The fact that it was catered toward a more mature audience, an audience that was going to have the money to spend on these things, not to mention that they sold it for cheaper anyway. And all in all, if it wasn't for the SOJ influence at the end, I think Sega would still be around to this day. And I think that they would all be a little surprised.
Believe that?
I really do. After all the research I've done on Sega over the years, I've been looking into the console wars for 5 or 6 years now. And I'll just say SOJ was the downfall to Sega of America. This is
Donnelly's argument. This is Donnelly's argument for Sega right here. That's the whole argument. That was Sega's whole argument.
But no, and I agree with what you said earlier, though. What we talked about was exactly what you said. It's always been subpar performance from a Nintendo console. Always. Outside from the NES. Since then, everything has been a lower performance standard by comparison to what was even out there. Even when it comes to PlayStation and N64. PlayStation was only 32-bit, N64 being 64, the octagons on PlayStation made everything look better. So they've always been a step behind, but they just continue to sell. And it's their legacy that they have. The fact that they started, in 1887 as a trading card company, and they've still been around to this day, it's pretty insane.
Don't forget about the love hotels.
Well, they're only in trading cards because gambling was illegal or something, right?
Gambling should never be illegal. Well, for Kyle's sake, it should. Living the right way.
There we go.
All right, Rich, why don't you give us your closing statement on SNES?
Well, it's funny. I think you mentioned polygons in your statement. So I am going to mention a game that I'm surprised no one else has mentioned up to this point, utilizing the FX chip.
I was wondering if anybody was going to talk about that. Yep.
Yeah. Listen, I've already mentioned that 2 of my all-time favorite games, Final Fantasy VI and A Link to the Past, are on this system. Those are probably my 1 and maybe 3 favorites of all time. Star Fox was a game changer. I was a console.
Star Fox.
That's what I'm saying. I can't believe no one brought it up until now. That was a game changer for me. I was a console kid through and through. I didn't play PC games until I was much older in college. That was my first experience with a game that utilized polygons. I was blown away. Nobody else at the time was doing anything remotely like Star Fox. I mean, it was next level stuff, next generation console stuff. on the Super Nintendo. And for me, that was a game changer. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I saw that being played. It just blew my 12-year-old, 13-year-old mind. So certainly Sega didn't have anything in its repertoire remotely close to as technical as Star Fox. And not only did it look fantastic, I mean, it was a great game in its own right. I mean, it's still to this day just fun to play.
It does stand up to today. Yep.
So that's my closing argument. Star Fox.
Good call.
All right. Sega gave Nintendo such a shot to the fucking mouth. We're talking about it 30 years later today. The blood, the gore. As a kid, that was just evolution to the next level of gaming. You're playing kiddie games all, the last 5 years. You have a Nintendo, Super Nintendo. You see Sega, it's like, holy shit. I just popped someone's head off and blood is flying everywhere. That was amazing to me as a kid. But again, they were innovative. They were trying different things. They just did a little too much, and Japan got in the way as far as, the Sega Saturn early release debacle, all the add-ons, all the crap. They were doing way too much, but they did kick Nintendo's ass definitively, especially with having several games that were better ports that were available on both systems, including a top-notch library of exclusive games that we're still talking about today.
Our definition of definitive is very
definitively different. For a short time.
Time,
and they had years of a head start.
Some stories are long, some stories are short, bro.
Yep,
but
and I agree.
They won the battle.
They made a hell of an impact, and they were one hell of a flash in the fucking pan.
You know what? If it wasn't for Sega, who knows? If it wasn't for Sega, Sony PlayStation may never have been developed either.
Have the streaming service.
You don't know.
God.
You don't know.
Revolutionary.
You don't know. You don't know that they had anything to do with it either.
Well, I know that they were in talks. There were definitely talks. But
I'm sure they were talking a lot about how much of a failure they were as a company.
Well, I'll just put it this: one day we'll have a conversation about Nintendo versus Sony and see where people stand.
Well, yeah, Nintendo, they were almost the architects of their own demise with that. But as you said, that will be a conversation for another day.
Nintendo, and it's still felt today.
We also would have no Sega, no Sony, no Xbox if it wasn't for Nintendo. Let's all remember that, and let's not go too hard against Nintendo, because the fact is, if Super Mario, that little Italian plumber, wasn't smushing Goombas, we would not have what we have today, known as these consoles that we all know and love.
Here's a fun fact. You know what Mario's original name was back in the original Donkey Kong days?
I do.
I think
Jumpman.
There it is. I knew Rich would know it.
Okay. Yeah.
Took me a second. Had it though.
Jumpman.
Had to really
Nintendo Sega Genesis.
Roll to the back of the Rolodex on that one.
I couldn't picture this.
Look, we're going to need a part 2 here. So we're going to continue this conversation on a future episode. We're also going to move forward in time as we kind of scale through the console wars universe. We're going to get into GameCube, 64, PlayStation 1. We're going to get into Sega Dreamcast. We're going to get into all of it.
Xbox and all of it.
Xbox versus PlayStation. We're going to get into all of it. I'm glad you guys are along for the ride. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're also going to do a little ranking. It's loosely related to our topic tonight. We're going to keep it simple, and we're going to go top 3 consoles, no honorable mention, and that's what we're going to get into. But first, I
really hate when you don't give us an honorable mention. I really enjoy
your face, Rich. I saw it on your face.
We can't get any wild cards. We can't.
You'll end up somehow having 6 on your list.
If we have honorable mentions,
really
not just make it into a top.
Mention.
That just become a top 4 at that point.
Do one anyway, Rich. Go against the grain.
Before we get to that, I want to get serious for a minute. We've been having a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. I want to take it down, get serious. We get some people in chat. I want everybody to think about this one, okay? I want you to just look around your room, look around your surroundings, wherever you are right now. Look around, okay? Look at all the textures, the walls, the floors, any items you might have in your room, okay? You know that your tongue knows how everything feels and tastes? Look at something You know exactly what it would be like if your tongue touched that item. Why is that?
I'm not there with you.
Oh, bullshit. Look at anything in your room.
I'm looking at.
Tell me that you don't know.
Look
If you were to
around.
lick that item, you know exactly what that would taste and feel like. Your tongue knows it all.
I mean, I have an idea of what I think it would be, but I can't say for sure that's what it is.
Scientifically proven. You look at an item, you know damn well what that's going to taste and feel like.
Okay.
I don't know if I enjoy that.
It's a well-traveled tongue.
Yeah, you don't enjoy it, but you know goddamn well that it's true. And before we get into our rankings, just real quick. So what do you think the first person who milked the cow was trying to do?
It's a great question. I've wondered that many times.
A little bestiality.
See, what's funny is like I know what Donnelly's beard would taste like, and I've never put my tongue on his beard. Well, it's been a couple weeks since I've done that, but like
it's like honey and saffron.
I know.
That's a lie.
Yeah, no. It's more like vape juice and Taco Bell.
And some 3D printer residue.
It'll kickstart your heart.
Oh my god! With Mushroom Men pictures it to have a woody taste. Kind of makes sense.
Like a pine or a cedar.
Do you ever like the small Nintendo cartridge? The coated. Somebody else read it.
Yep. Have you ever looked at a small Nintendo cartridge? They're coated with a bittering agents. That's true. The Switch cartridges are coated with a bittering agents to make sure kids don't pop them in their mouth.
Oh my god!
Really?
Oh god!
I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I've heard that. I think it's just people preventing people from licking. I wonder how many people licked one afterward.
One way to definitively find that out.
Yeah.
Isn't that from Dan? Isn't that from Dennis the Menace?
Oh,
yes.
With the grill, and he's looking at the.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh gosh, I remember that.
Oh god. All right. So I need an answer from all of you. I'm going to go very quickly. But if your pet could talk, what's the most embarrassing thing they would say about you, Donnelly?
You should see him put his socks on.
You were so ready with that. Okay. Kyle.
Jeez, this guy struggles to get out of bed. Someone resuscitate this guy. What's going on?
Yeah. A lot of moaning and groaning.
Others.
Rich, you got like 17 cats. What would they say?
That I sing off key in the shower.
I mean, I feel like mine would have something to do with shitting. If I had a dog, okay, I'm gonna tell a horrible story. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna say it. So, true story today. So, yeah, I don't have a pet currently, but if I did, when I went to Dunkin' this morning, I got myself a blueberry muffin. I don't often eat muffins, but this morning it was talking to me. And I felt the need to grab a muffin. Little did I know what that bag would then. Yeah, Grandma, please stop watching. Yes. What that bag.
Grandma, you're about to hear some horrors.
Would then later be used for. So I realized at one point in the day, and I've known for multiple days now that I've been low on toilet paper. And this morning I officially ran out. I had put
I don't like where this is going.
I had put a Target pickup. I put a Target pickup order in. Okay. Put a Target pickup order, which included toilet paper at the time. But everyone and their mother was doing the same thing, preparing for their snowstorm. So I'm in the middle of work. I work from home. And for some reason, like I cannot, it's just not happening. It's got to happen. Okay. It's got to happen. And I have no toilet paper. So I had to bring a roll of paper towels, and you can't flush a paper towel. And those paper towels ended up in my blueberry muffin Dunkin' Donuts bag out in my trash bin this morning. So something like that, I feel like would be pretty embarrassing for my dog to witness. And I know he would be looking at me with a side eye as if I'm a complete psychopath, which I am.
He's disappointed.
He is. And now the world can be disappointed because this is just me and this is how the type of life that I live. But with that
Okay,
being
so
said,
I have a quick question for Kyle. Quick question for Kyle.
There was a lot of blast processing.
Blast processing.
Actually, Donnelly or Kyle can field this one. Okay, so just by looking at it, what does this taste like?
I know exactly what that tastes like.
Ooh. It tastes sexy.
I know exactly what that tastes like.
For some reason, it's like I know it's not yours, not with yours, but I just imagine cigarette smoke.
Now,
I feel like
do you have a Super Nintendo that's yellow right now?
like cigarette smoke. I know it's not yours. Yours wouldn't, but
that tastes like a one-night stand. That tastes like a one-night stand where you got into some shit you didn't want to, and then it was over, and you're like, okay, let me get back to my wife, which is the Super Nintendo.
I like some of the comments here.
The old standby.
We got to taste like glory.
It tastes like nostalgia.
Tastes like victory.
Tastes like.
Probably the third time this month he's seen it. No, that was a first. Honestly, it's been a long time. Super disappointed. Can't please everybody. But
there were extra blueberries in that muffin today.
There were a lot of blueberries. That muffin was spectacular, by the way. That might have been part of the issue. But with that being said, let's get to our top 3 rankings. Newports and failure. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Sega Genesis equals Newports and failure. So with that being said, we're going to start off with Rich. And we're going to go in descending order. Top 3 consoles of all time. And this is Desert Island style. This is your favorite. Not the best. These are your 3 favorites. Let's start with your number 3, Rich.
All right. And we were 100% sure no honorable mention, right?
Give it anyway.
Yeah.
It's not a top 4.
All right. I'm going to play by the rules this time.
No, you won't. You'll find a way.
This was tough. Number 3, Xbox 360.
360 made your top 3.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Almost exclusively because of Gears of War and Halo. Not the only reasons.
And
not the only reasons.
The first 3 Halos were so fucking good. I mean, the amount of hours I put into those games was
created the standard for multiplayer. First-person shooters.
I guess it's on me. My number 3, PlayStation 2. Rich mentioned it earlier. Rich mentioned it earlier. For me, it just felt like that next big step where PS1 definitely made some strides as far as the graphics go, but where I think the graphics came in, I think the gameplay was lacking a lot on the original PlayStation. The games they felt a little disjointed. They didn't feel super smooth to play. They looked different than anything we had seen up to that point. And that was kind of that shell shock that we got with PS1, and they had some great titles. But PS2, I feel like, really took that next step ahead where you felt like you were playing something different. I mean, you had true like 3-dimensional open world designs of games that just felt totally and utterly immersive. And I think they really set the bar for what we have today from the gaming landscape.
Yeah, PS1's graphics aged like milk, but PS2 was just like a whole we got what we got today. Yeah.
Aged like milk.
Milk was a bad choice.
Donnelly, number 3.
My number 3 is the first console that we ever had in my house growing up. It's the Atari 2600. Me and my brother playing baseball in the 2600, not letting my sister get involved and play because she wasn't cool enough. And, just sitting there with E.T. We had E.T., of course we did. Figuring out what to do in that game as like a bunch of 5 and through 7-year-olds. It made no sense whatsoever. No. I didn't understand half of those games. Now my favorite game on the 2600 is Berserk. But I've actually got one
played Berserk
set up behind me. Oh, come by, we'll play Berserk.
I will. We'll go berserk.
They will go berserk with Berserk.
Kyle, number 3.
All right. Well, I know I spent all episode going against it, but we got to have Super Nintendo on there. Just the next evolution from Nintendo. Countless titles. Again, you were right. Donkey Kong Country was the dagger. Damn that minecart level. Still thinking about that shit. I'm gonna beat it next time I'm over.
With the lights that would, yeah.
Fucking level. Turtles in Time, like, dude, it was just it's a heartfelt system, and having the Super Nintendo Mini that came out back in 2017. I got one for my son too. Countless hours playing together, so that's gonna be my number 3.
Fair enough. Rich, number 2.
Number 2 for me is the PS2. So you already said pretty much everything I was going to say. The PS2 kind of perfected the system. It perfected what came before it. And then really, that was kind of, I think, Sony's jumping off point. That was their real powerhouse system where
I agree.
They took the lead and then just ran with it. So yeah, I mean, huge library. I could talk for hours just on PS2 games. It was a fantastic console. If you were a RPG lover such as myself, of course, the Metal Gear games,
Grand Theft Auto. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I could go on, but I won't. I'll save that for.
And it played DVDs.
I will mention. I'm going to sneak it in.
And it played DVDs. That was
played DVDs.
It did.
My DVD player in college.
Number 2, Super Nintendo. We spent enough time talking about that console tonight. I'm not going to go anymore, but it belongs in the number 2 spot. I think that's the right spot. That's all I have to say. And that's all I got to say about that. You like eggs, Booker? Go ahead, Donnelly, number 2.
My number 2. My number 2 is the PlayStation. It was my first introduction into a 3D world. I went straight from, my family had NES. We had Atari, NES, and then PlayStation. And somewhere in the mix, there was an Atari Jaguar too.
What?
Yeah, that's how I grew up.
You guys have a DeLorean? Bouncing around.
Yeah, it was great. We were all over the place with it. But the PlayStation games like Spyro introduced that open world dynamic to me. Remember the first games we got on was Spyro and Rugrats. That's right, the Rugrats PlayStation game. The platforming was absolutely terrible. It was horrible to play. But then Final Fantasy VII. You got the black bottom discs, like all these iconic things about it. Just
do you remember how bad the SmackDown games were on those?
Oh, they were terrible.
Oh my, they looked amazing.
Yeah,
amazing at the time. But God,
I just need to mention Tekken.
Tekken.
Oh boy,
Yep.
That's a good call out.
Yep,
that's a good call out.
Wave Racer was another good one.
Crash Bandicoot, baby.
Yep, Crash Bandicoot, Wipeout. I mean, the list goes on, but that's my number 2.
Gran Turismo,
PlayStation, Gran Turismo, multi-disc games, just that whole concept.
Agreed.
Number 2,
Resident Evil.
Talking about Resident Evil 2. So take you back to Christmas '93. I open a gift out of order. I open up the gift. It's X-Men on Sega Genesis. God damn. I've never been more excited in my life. That system, especially all summer '95 Sega Channel, ahead of its time. We've talked enough about it all night, but Sega Genesis is my number 2, right above the Super Nintendo where it belongs. That's it.
Sega did not make my list.
Well, but, your list sucks.
Surprise, Sydney. Rich, you're number 2.
All right. Well, I mean, it should come as no surprise based on tonight's subject matter. Number 1 is the SNES. I think
number 1. I'm sorry, I said number 2. Number 1.
You did. I was keeping count. Don't you worry.
I
got you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. I mean, I think Tim and I pretty much proved our point why the SNES is number 1. A lot of my all-time favorite games. I've already mentioned some, a couple others.
Rash
Contra
3, man.
3, Gradius 3. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on. Final Fantasy 4. Yeah, I mean, it is the system of my childhood. It is probably the system that I've logged the most hours into, combined, childhood and adult. Yeah, it is, for me, it is just about the perfect system.
It was almost the perfect system. What system did you just talk about?
Oh, and Super The Empire Strikes Back. It may be the best Star Wars game of all time. Just have to throw that out there too.
I don't think I've ever played it.
What?
You should right now.
Really?
I have.
In fact,
Yeah.
You should log off.
Oh man,
right now, and pop it in your Super Nintendo.
I got it even from the PlayStation Store and put it on my PlayStation. It's that good to play back on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get to my number one, and Mushroom Man gets it. Or I'm sorry, Monty Chapman gets it. Monty's my boy. I feel like he's had my back tonight. I don't know who he is, but I love him. Nintendo 64 because GoldenEye. Nintendo 64 because Nintendo 64 is the greatest console of all time. Nothing.
It's not.
It is though. But
with the cartridges over the CDs, huh?
Listen. Okay. Nothing. There is no childhood console gaming moment that compares to anything in my life than the Christmas that I woke up and opened the Nintendo 64 and years of playing Mario, Super Mario 2, Super Mario 3, Mario Kart, anything Mario, to open that system up and pop in Super Mario 64 and have an open world, three-dimensional Mario game. It blew my mind, okay? Completely blew my mind. And that's just Mario, which honestly probably wouldn't even make a top 5, maybe even top 10 of all-time games on the 64. But that was my first dipping of the toes in the water. Then we talk about, you mentioned Star Fox earlier, Rich. Star Fox 64 was incredible. They took what they put out in and they built upon it, and it was spectacular. Okay. Now we go into GoldenEye. We can go GoldenEye. We can take Super Mario Kart and go Mario Kart 64, the greatest Mario Kart game ever made. We want to talk wrestling. You brought up wrestling earlier. To this day, the greatest wrestling games ever created were WCW and NWO Revenge, WWF No Mercy. It was THQ and Jack's Pacific that made those games, a toy company partnering with THQ before they went defunct, created perfect wrestling games. WWF No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000, WCW and NWO Revenge, the same game engine for all of them, and they were incredible, period. Nintendo 64, number one with a bullet. I will argue that until the day I croak. Donnelly.
What color console?
We'll have to save that argument for another episode.
I had the standard console.
The standard. Okay.
I never went with those stupid clear.
And wasn't that the first black console from Nintendo? They saw Sega made a good move there and wanted to switch over.
No, it was actually graphite.
Like
Sega,
a graphite.
Sega was a shiny black, and Nintendo 64 was a graphite that was grayish in color.
That's like the iPhone Space Gray, because that's a real color.
Yeah, because it's not jet black like they also had. It's space gray, and this was
very
graphite,
matte
which
black.
was matte in color. And you know why it was better than Sega? You touch that Sega, your fucking fingerprints were all over it. Touch that 64 anywhere you want, you won't find a fingerprint. Number one, Donald.
My number one, even though I've talked Sega all night, is not a Sega system. It is the original OG Nintendo Entertainment System. That is my number one. That was the game system that I put the most hours into in all of my life. I remember renting cartridges for that system. I remember wanting to take that system apart so I could jump the circuitry in it so I could play unofficial and, out of region cartridges. I've dismantled so many of those things over the years. I've got a pristine one sitting right behind me right there in great condition. And it's my favorite console.
Cheers. I ain't going to fault you for that.
Respectable.
And
first love.
But certainly not least, swimming in dysentery. Kyle, number one. Love your background, by the way.
Thanks
for fucking details. I love that. What's that art piece behind you?
I have original drawing of the Sentinels with the X-Men blue team. Yep, from a Christmas present from 1994 from my mother's friend who drew it. So it's a 101.
Pretty good. All right, give us your number one.
Well, my number one's been mentioned before here, but it was just a destroyer of other systems. And it did definitively, that's the word I used tonight, did kick Nintendo's ass. It's not even up for debate. GameCube's ass. It was the PlayStation 2. 13-year lifespan. No one can even argue that GameCube was better than PS2. They're in the same generation.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Right.
It was
not even
different
the same
and fun,
class.
but it wasn't better. I wouldn't make that argument.
Right, exactly. Xbox was the first model out. Didn't really threaten it at the time. PS1, it was just a drastic improvement and change. It made you not even think about the PS1 anymore, let alone play it. And again, Sega actually came out with the greatest potential system ever in the Dreamcast that was out $99.99, but it could not compete with the PS2. So they actually had their system that was actually maybe arguably better than what Nintendo had and Xbox at the time. But PS2 is such a destroyer, it couldn't even compete with anything. So that's PS2. It's my number one.
Look, you got a lot of fans out here, Kyle, that are on your
respectable
side. And
respectable.
You know what?
Like,
wrong, but respectable.
And this is why I was so excited for this topic tonight, because we get heated, we bitch and moan back and forth with each other, but like at the end of the day, we're all here for a reason. We love just being nerds. Okay, we love I love Sega Genesis. Okay, we love all these consoles. Like, this is what we grew up with. This is nostalgic. This is nerdstalgia. This is what we're all about. Living in the past, because let's face it, the world sucks right now. I don't know if anyone's looked around at all, but you got banks failing, inflation at all-time highs.
Tough to be part of Silicon Valley.
You've got on the news a few nights ago, you have them talking about an alien mothership. I shit you not. An alien mothership. A statement from the Pentagon on national TV, and nobody gives a shit because nobody's surprised by anything anymore, okay? So at the end of the day, we are here for one reason and one reason only, to nerd out and to escape horseshit that goes around on this globe, because there is a hell of a lot of horseshit. There's a lot of negativity. You put on the TV outside of a streaming platform, you open up social media, you will be spoon-fed negativity, and that's something that we will never do. We want to go back to a simpler time, a much better time, before the world went to shit, and we want to play our little Marios and our Sonics and our Metal Gear Solids and our WWF No Mercy with the greatest game engine ever created for a wrestling game. And that's what we are here for, and that's what we're going to continue to provide every week. Now, here's the deal. I love the interactivity in the chat. If you are not already in our Facebook group, okay, please join, because we want your opinions. Let us know what you want us to do a whole show about. Let us know if you want to be a guest on the show and you've got a strong opinion and you want to jump on for an hour with us and you want to share your opinion. I
post a lot of really dumb memes.
Yes, we do. Mostly dumb memes, but some good conversation as well.
A lot of fun in there. A lot of fun happens.
We have a lot of fun. So I would encourage everybody, if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, please find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, like Gary V would say. Find us on TikTok.
You're still young.
Subscribe.
You're still young.
You got so much time. You got so much time. You're only 35. You have time. So
Shut up
as
already,
Gary
bro.
V would say, like and subscribe it helps us out a ton. We're trying to slowly but surely snowball and grow this channel. So anything, Monty, you'd love to be a guest, we'll book it. We'll get you on as a guest. Anything you want to talk about, I don't care what it is, let's do it. But we really want to thank everybody for joining us each and every week, where you can find us every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here at Nerdstalgia Pod on YouTube Live. Any final thoughts from you, Donnelly, before we sign off?
The last thing I want to say is a little piece of philosophy, something to get your mind thinking once again.
The hell was that?
I don't know. But my question
What'd that
for all of
taste
you,
like?
just take a minute and imagine yourself being invisible. Now close your eyes. Can you still see? So I'll just leave you guys with that little thought nugget. If you're invisible and you close your eyes, can you still see?
Is that what happens when the mothership takes us?
That's no joke.
Just take
Look
me.
that up. What the hell is going on?
I'm with it.
Kyle, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I want to shout out my son, who's a big fan of this channel. He always wants to watch the episodes. I just won a Golden Knight Award for being the best second grader in his school. He loves this, and this is why we do it. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
Thank you. And I was going to say, man, you're a Batman fan? Adventures of Batman and Robin? Much better port on Genesis than the SNES. That's all I got.
You had to throw that in there. Rich, any final thoughts, buddy?
Honorable mention, TurboGrafx 16.
There it is.
The honorable.
Listen, for Donnelly, for Kyle, for Rich, I am Tim. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you next week, Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have yourselves a wonderful night. We will see you next week. Good night.